my name is Ken Rolfsness and welcome to the Show Me the Money presentation. Before I begin, I'd like you to think about a few things. A, when would you like to retire? In 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? B, how much money would you like to retire on each month? $1,000, $3,000, $5,000 or more? And C, how much money would you need to have in the bank invested at 6% in order to get that? In other words, if you wanted $10,000 a month, you would need to have $2.4 million in the bank at 6%. And we know we're not going to get 6%. What you're about to learn are some of the secrets that my wife and I have been able to apply to allow us to enjoy the lifestyle we have over the last 9-10 years. Now, I'm not telling you these things to boast, but to give you confidence to know that what you're about to learn can help you get whatever it is that you want. Now, the three things that most people want to know about a business are: 1, what is it? 2, how much money can they make? And 3, what do they need to do to make the money? But before we do all that, one thing I want you to think about is I want you to know with all your heart what it is that you want, and we'll show you how to get that.
Well, the three things that most people want are either more time, more money, or better health. Unfortunately, the people that have a lot of time tend to not have the money to enjoy that time. And the people that tend to have a lot of money generally don't have the time to enjoy that money. And even if you had all the time and money in the world, if your health was failing you, then most would agree that you couldn't enjoy your time and money to its fullest extent.
Well, as for me, I grew up in Blue Springs, Missouri. I'm half Samoan, half Norwegian. And we grew up poor. There was times that there were 17 of us living in a 3-bedroom house. We lived in trailer parks and, just trying to make ends meet. Well, when I was 19, I took 2 years off and I served a voluntary church mission for a Christian church in Australia. And at the end of that, that's when I met Michelle. Well, she flew over. A bit later, we got married. We had a big Samoan wedding, 12 bridesmaids and the grooms, and we had this big massive cake that Auntie Lupa made, and everyone thought we must have been just rolling in the dough. It looked really good. But the reality was this: I took my wife on our honeymoon to the exotic locations of Interstate Inn. It was the cheapest place around, and it was 5 minutes down the road. And at the time, it was $12 a night. And so that was the reality of my life at the time. Well, I became a factory worker, and I retreaded truck tires, making $5 an hour. And it was a horrible, dingy, stinky, smelly job. You come home and the smells in the carpet and the rubber, it just wasn't a great experience. But that's, I didn't know anything better. My mom was a factory worker, my dad was a janitor. Well, long story short, we moved to Australia. And Michelle's parents flew us out there, and we ended up living in the home with them for 5 years. When you don't make a lot of money when you're a factory worker. Well, long story short, I then was tired of the factory. I was 10 years in the retreading factory, and even though I made it into management, all they did was change the color of your shirt, and then they owned you. It's really not a cool thing. Well, I thought, enough is enough. I was 31 years old, and I thought life is too short. I wasn't happy as far as a career. I was living with her parents. I felt like I wasn't supplying, I wasn't taking care of her as a husband should. Well, I was so tired of the factory, I thought, something's got to change. So I got a job working for a man named Phil. Now, Phil's a pretty cool guy. In fact, he's one of the best businessmen in the world. In the year 2001 and 1998, he's in the who's who of business. I started working for Phil, and everything he touches turns to gold. And so I thought, well, maybe he can show me some things. And I was introduced to him by my brother-in-law, who's an accountant. Well, long story short, I couldn't sell. I bombed thoroughly. I was not any good at it. And lo and behold, I found out later that I was so bad that he was about to fire me. And I've never been fired from any job in my entire life. Well, it was around that time that a lady named Melanie from church, who's a naturopath, called me and introduced me to this company. And at first I was just, laughing, oh yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And I really didn't know what I was saying no thanks to. I don't know, something in my mind. But anyways, eventually an audio was sent to me, and I listened to this audio and I thought, this could be something pretty good. So I got involved with the company. My wife was very upset with me. but I just knew that I was tired of the factory. I was tired of living with her parents, and I needed to do something different. And so I went to Phil, and I said, hey, Phil, and I asked him to listen to this audio. I said, Phil, you're rich, I'm poor. Tell me what you think. Anyways, about a week later, he listened to it, he calls me up and he says, Ken, if a quarter of what's on this audio is true, you and I are gonna make an absolute fortune. I said, money? Didn't think there's a ton of money on it. He goes, Ken, you don't understand what you might have. Well, anyways, there's a couple weeks after that he called me up and he said, I'm flying to America. Remember, Australia's on the other side of the world. And I said, what for? He says, I want to go see if this is a real deal. You know, because if this is true, this could be one of the greatest companies of all time. And so he flew, him and his wife, they flew business class to the United States. They met the owners of the company. They went and checked out that they were debt-free. At the time, the company was only 2 years old and already branching into, you know, all these countries. And he calls me up and says, Ken, what's your IPC number? And I said, why? He said, well, you introduced me to this company. I'd like to get started. And I thought, wow, really? This rich guy, Phil, is now we're gonna partner up. He's gonna work with me. And I thought, wow, this is exciting. Well, that was June 3rd of 1998. By September of that same year, just a few months later, I had actually tripled my income, what Phil was paying me. And I walked into Phil's office and I showed him the check. Here's my part-time pay, you know, 15 hours a week. Here's your pay, 60 to 80 hours a week, and I'm making that much more than this. And I said, Phil, I can no longer afford to work for you. And I was able to fire my boss. Now the cool thing about that is just a few months later, Phil sold that particular business and he now does this with me full time. In fact, we've been around the world many times together and it's really exciting. You know, since 1998, I've been around the world about 43 times now, and it's before that, never. A year after that, I was able to get enough money and I was able to buy my wife this 7-bedroom, big place. I was really excited. We had one kid when we moved into it, and life is amazing. I was able to do something that I always wanted to do. Since then, I was able to get the cars. I've had many cars since then, and this particular one was my first one. I really miss her. This is an S-Class Mercedes-Benz. It's got the bulletproof windows and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, my wife always wanted a Lexus 4-wheel drive. We're able to do that. We've had many cars since. And life has been an absolute fairy tale for us. Another thing that money does give you, cash flow, is it gives you the time to do the things that you want. For instance, I love to play the drums. I have a band, it's called the Famous Unknowns. These are my best friends in the world. And we've actually been able to be flown all over the world because we're a show band. It's a lot of fun. Also, in this business, you can choose who you want to work with. And so, for instance, this is my best friend, Daryl Young. He's actually the filmmaker producing this. And Daryl was on the unemployment for 8 years. Not because he was lazy, but because he was a stuntman. And it was only so many times that the movies came to Australia. And so in the middle of the movies, in the different movies, he was having to collect unemployment. And within just a few months, he was able to come off of the unemployment, and he and I have been all over the world many times in so many different locations.
I used to be on the unemployment benefit for about 8 years, and then when I got involved with this company, 4 years later, the company flew me to the US from Australia and put me up in this 6-star hotel. So not bad for an unemployed person. And since then they've brought me to America about 4 or 5 times. They've sent me to Hong Kong, New Zealand and around Australia, accommodation, airfares and everything.
If travel is what you want to do with your family before they get too old and out there, you know, my family's been able to come with me on many of these trips. In fact, my kids have been to Disneyland so many times, and remember, we live in Australia. Been there so many times that now we say, you want to go to Disneyland? Like, oh, is there someplace else we can go? I never thought I'd hear the day that a kid that's 6 years old or 7 years old would say that.
Tahiti, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore. And then I had to get an extension on the passport. Extensions were added in 2003.
You know, sometimes people use the excuse of their children that they don't have time because they got young children or they got church callings or all these things. Let me say one thing. Don't use your children as an excuse why you can't do something to take care of the future. You should use them as the reason why you're doing something.